Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this June 12th, 2015 day on our calendar, a Friday. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you can listen to all my shows, all my live shows from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. We're also on several AM stations in the South, selected shortwave stations, and you can get all my replays going back 10 years on ArcticBeacon.com. Can't believe how time flies. And it's Friday, the end of the week. And, you know, I've about exhausted the topic of the flat Earth, at least from my standpoint. I've been researching hundreds of hours of this, got a little obsessed with it, but I think it's a good subject. And I've learned a lot. And I still got a little bit to do today on it. And I can probably wrap that up quickly. I want to finish a video or start one, and it's got some information about the flat Earth you might like. But I've given you a lot of places to go to research it. It is not it's not a subject to be taken lightly. To think that that you're crazy if you think the Earth is flat. It's really an interesting subject, and it really talks about how far we've been deceived. And my question to you has always been, how far have you been deceived? Think about it. What do you believe, what don't you believe from the government, from the Vatican, from NASA? And maybe you should do some research on that. I always say research the Vatican and the Jesuit order, and I've done so many hours of that. I used to do shows in Italian on that. Believe it or not, that's where I learned it. And I learned how to speak Italian when I lived there. But I thought, for a while, some days on Fridays, I used to take calls, and that would kind of wrap up the week, but I'm not doing that today. And don't take many calls anymore, at least during this period of my show. I used to do it all the time. And I found out that you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I may do it in the future, but today, let's just talk about some important things in life. We always forget about those things, the really important things. What is it? In America, success is a subject that we need to talk about. What is success to you? What do you think it is? Is it a big, huge mansion in Malibu, a nice farm in Kansas? What is success? How do you get success? Is it monetary, or is it something more to you? It's a good subject to talk about. What about success and understanding the truth? Can the two work together? Think about that. If you really understand the truth, does it really block the way you can live in America successfully? Can you ever become that Wall Street banker? Can you ever become that media star? Could you ever work in Hollywood? Could you ever do anything once you realize the Vatican-led New World Order? Well, that's a question you can answer. I can't answer that for you. But as far as I'm concerned, I just wanted to ask that question. What does success mean to you? Does it mean that you've, found the Lord? Many people believe success comes in a spiritual way. Or is it a combination of many things? Or does one thing lead you to another? For example, you find truth, and then that leads you to other things. And what about all those questions about your neighbor and how to treat other people and really what you should do? Are you kind of an isolationist? I'm more of an isolationist, to be honest with you. I'm not a big get out there and talk to, in fact, I've been called, much of the time, I've always kind of been not a loner. I just enjoyed when I was a journalist getting out. I had a purpose to be with people. And outside of a small family unit that I had, I grew up in a very small family. When I was younger, in high school, of course, a lot of friends and doing all those social things. But as I got older, I found myself communicating with people through my work and liking my time alone. And so, how can you be successful in life? Is it choosing what's right for you? I think that's really a key. Choosing what's right for you and really standing strong and going after it. And whether it means a lot of money or not a lot of money, is that really success when you think about it? When you gear your life towards money, and don't get me wrong, it's important. You have to have something. to fall back on. And a lot of times we make decisions for the wrong reasons through life, but I think what we try to do is to correct those and then to move forward. Well, success. Great subject. And it's only you can answer how you can become successful in life. And many of the people on my show over the years were very successful and they had very little money. So think about that. Of course, in America, you want to be like when you talk to somebody that really doesn't get it. They just look at, I think I got to have that Ferrari. I want to make $1 billion by the time I'm 23. And I wonder how many of these people who work in Silicon Valley, all these nerds that work behind these computers, how they do it is beyond me to begin with. And so let's move forward. Success. You figure that one out for yourself, and hopefully your life becomes a success for the short time that you're on this planet. And when I say short time, I mean short time. And in the background, you probably can't hear it, but I have a baseball game on. And sometimes when I do a radio show, I like to have it on and watch baseball as I do the show, and I don't really pay attention. I just like watching it. I like the green grass. I like things like that. And anyway, I grew up, as a journalist. People that knew me, that lived in the same house with me, used to wonder, they'd always say, God, you always have something on in the background, don't you? And I said, I think better when I have a lot of things going on. Some people like really quiet. I don't. And the reason I don't is I have this ringing in my ears. I don't know, there's some medical thing about it. But my ears ring all the time, and it never stops. And I've gotten used to it, but a lot of times I like noise to take the ringing away. But anyway, I grew up working in newspaper offices that are very busy, and I learned how to concentrate around noise. And I find I concentrate better around noise than I do around quietness. Interesting. But I'm a light sleeper. Figure that one out. Well, I guess because I like noise, so any little bit of noise is what I really want, so I got to get up and listen. I don't know. But anyway, let's get to another subject, education. Important. How do you want to educate yourself? How were you? I always look back at how I was educated when I was young, and I went through a Catholic education. I remember my mother taking me to Catholic school, kindergarten, all the way up St. Mary's, and I went to school there at Burlington, Wisconsin. I also went to Catholic school in Chicago, Illinois, and Notre Dame High School, and I can always remember the education process. And there were certain things that intrigued me, and there are certain things that didn't. But I went off to college and basically went on a football scholarship, so I really didn't care about education that period of time. I just was really happy that I had my college paid for. And I didn't want to put a burden on my dad because we'd just gone through some family crisis with my mother and stuff, and he was working on a new business and all that kind of stuff, so I was really happy about that. But education, how is it important to you? What is it all about? I really started to educate myself after college when I became a journalist and just started asking questions, started reading. I'm not one that sits around and reads a lot of books through. I don't have the patience for it. I've always been the kind of a person that, I read some, but I subscribe to Mark Twain. You know what? Just think about it. Literacy isn't as bad as they say. Just think how many bad books you don't have to read. But I'm kind of a hop, skip, and a jumper when I read books. I like read this. If I'm bored, I go to the next. I look back. And maybe I go to the end of it sometimes and read the ending and then kind of imagine what the beginning was. But I always like writing more than reading. I guess if I spent my whole time reading, how could I write? Interesting. And God, when you think about it, all the books they give you in these education class, in schools are so off base anyway. I guess you got to learn their side of the story and then go to yours. But what is education to you? Ask yourself that. Are you going to stop just because? I got a law degree. I can tell you that. That sounds pretty good. I have a JD behind my name. I joke sometimes and say you should replace it with JA. But people ask me, why did you go to law school? And I said, I enjoy choosing very, very corrupt professions. That's my goal in life. And I picked the first one, journalism, thinking that there was freedom of speech, and found out there wasn't. Secondly, then I picked law because I thought there was a justice system, but there wasn't. So I picked corrupt professions to get educated. I should have been a veterinarian. No. You know what? I have a friend, my good friend. He's a horse dentist. Now that to me, and I was so intrigued by that, I've known my good friend for years. He's a horse dentist, and he still rides cutting horses. And we got our first horse together years ago, and I remember buying the first bale of hay, and that began my interest in horses. But anyway, education to me, formal education in law school to me was important. I really enjoyed it, and it became almost like a goal. Like I entered into a sport. When I first started, I had to get that degree, and even though I hated it, it was something. I think I did it because everybody when I was young told me Polish people were stupid. So I was going to show them, and I got my law degree, but I never practiced. So there you go. There goes my all my savings. I was going to make a lot of money as a lawyer, and so I had something to do when I got older. But I found other things. So, education. When does it begin? When does it end? Most people say, "Oh, you always educate yourself." You'd be surprised how many people don't. And I really believe that education becomes if you're if you question everything, you'll educate yourself, and you don't believe anything. I've learned never to believe. I learned this when I was a journalist one time. The first job I had, I was dealing with these politicians, and I was just a kid wet under the ears, didn't know the first thing about journalism. And first thing I realized is all these city politicians were lying to me. So I learned how to read backwards. They'd have all these papers in front of them on their desk, and I said, if I could read those, maybe I can figure out what they're really doing. So you got to realize, don't listen to any, throughout the years, I don't believe anything that the government says, anything the Vatican or all these big religious leaders say, and I don't believe anything that comes out of NASA, as you know if you've listened to my last shows. Now, to leave the big subject of education, is it important to you to have a degree behind your name? Is it important to you to let people know you're smart? Are you smart because you talk well? Not really. I talk pretty well, and I'm very dumb. Think about that. So it's not always your speech. I've met very intelligent people who really couldn't put a sentence together. And then again, I've met very slick-talking people that were very dumb. What is this streetwise? I've always wondered about that. You watch these shows and you listen to people. Oh, he's real streetwise. He's not very book-learned, but he's streetwise. Well, what is that? Really, when it gets down to it, what it is the guy likes to be a thug, I think, and learns how to live on the streets and is streetwise. And, isn't it interesting, though? I always tell a mafia story, and the reason I do is because a lot of people glamorize that in America. Godfather 1, Godfather 2. Some people say, oh, I didn't like Godfather 3. I like the part about the Vatican in that. And I kind of looked at it from a movie-making point of view. I think it was a well-made movie. But we glorify crime, don't we? And when you start researching crime, you see that the government's involved in it themselves. So we have a criminal, our leaders in our country are criminals. And so it's easy for people to make the decision to go into crime because money's easy, right? And if you get caught and you're not up at the top levels, they'll make an example of you. And the mafia has its own little rules and regulations. And I always give a mafia story. When I was in Italy, I lived in a small town named Campagnano di Roma, which was about 30 clicks, maybe 35 kilometers from Rome, and also stayed in Rome at times. But when I came to that little town, of course, Italians were very interested in American people, and I got to know everybody in town because it was a town of 3,000 people. And I used to stop at the same little trattoria and got the greatest food. And the senora that ran the place and her family, they were like my family. She would she would have the best food. I'm telling you, I ate like a king. But one day I'm walking through town, and this really slick-looking guy in a Ferrari drives by and says, "Hey, Americano," starts talking to me, right? Stops the car and says, "Hey, let me buy you dinner." That was the last time for 6 months I ever bought dinner again. And he was a really slick-looking guy, very handsome, young. He was about in his late 20s. And he would see me at the coffee shop, we had this little coffee before. Sometimes I'd take the bus into town. And he'd be there and buy me a coffee. Every time I'd go in town, he'd buy me dinner. I mean, I started to feel guilty. And when I'd go into the little trattoria, the senora would say, "No, it's already taken care of." Oh. And I'd say, "Who is this guy?" And they'd say, "Oh, Antonio, yes, Antonio. He lives up in that villa, beautiful family, beautiful wife, a lot of kids." And I used to see his wife and kids run through town. And he's a land investor. He's very smart in investing in land. I said, "Oh, and you wouldn't see him for a while. You wouldn't see him for days sometimes, And then all of a sudden he'd show up again. And then, so there it was. Antonio was a friend of mine, and he always was interested in America, and he was always wanting to go there. And he would always ask me how to speak English, and I'd try to teach him a few things. And he was really a good guy. And I never thought twice about it. So I go into Rome. I was working as a journalist, and so I walk into Piazza Barberini. That's where our office was, and there's a place I'd have a coffee, and I picked up the paper. That's back when people actually read papers. There was no internet back then. It was kind of fun without this computer. I'm going to have a computer put in my coffin, but I'm not going to even have a coffin. We'll get to death later. I'm going through major subjects today that we kind of overlook. We never really think about them. But so anyway, I'm not educating you right now about how to think about crime. And have you ever known anybody in the mafia? And why is crime easy? Well, anyway, so I'm reading the paper, and there it is, right there on the front page, Antonio, splattered all over the front page, in a barber's chair in Naples. I read the story. Turns out he was the right-hand man of the Naples mob, one of the most, what's their name again? Jeez, I keep forgetting. But they have a name in Naples for the mafia there. And he was a member of that. He was the right-hand man of the head. And so they were doing kind of like a big, huge bloodletting thing where everybody was getting killed. And they were fighting over turf wars in Naples. The Camorra, yeah. And the next thing I know, his wife and whole family had abandoned that villa, and they were gone. I don't know whatever happened to them. I know they weren't killed, but they were killing everybody right down to everybody in the family, wiping out the bloodlines. So it isn't as glamorous as we make it out to be on TV. It gets pretty bloody and brutal, and I saw it right up close in Italy. And again, the stereotype that all Italians are mafia, that's wrong. Most Italians despise it. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that, talking about education. So education, to me, has always been important. I don't think I'll ever stop learning. And probably when I'm my last few breaths, I'll still be asking questions about all these important subjects that I talked about over all the years. Well, what better than to go that way? Because once we figure out that we know everything, we realize how much we don't know. And most people that think they know everything or don't want to open up their mind and learn, well, I don't consider them very intelligent or educated. So let's leave it at that. You think about that subject. The last subject on this half hour I want to talk about is a spiritual path. And on a station like this, it's appropriate. We'll talk about it from a personal experiences and also from your experiences. And how do you, where do you see yourself in the spiritual walk right now in your life? Have you gone, were you one of those? I've known people that told me from the time they were 10 they found Jesus and they've never wavered. And then there's people like me who have been like doubting it all my life and, gone one way, the other way, back and forth, and back and forth, and have learned a lot about it. So I'm going to ask you where you're at. One of the things I always talk about is don't be afraid to test your faith. I mean, I talk about I know a lot of people that have a lot of different faiths, and I'm not an evangelist by any means. I'm a questioner, a journalist. I leave it at that. And I've learned so much and have understood many things that I talk to you in real truth about it. And I just want you to think about where you're at and how you've gotten there and where you're going in the future. And my only message on this subject is don't be afraid to listen to people who have differing views. It's not going to stray you away from your faith if it's strong. That's all I have to say on that subject. We got about 3 minutes left before the break. And I want to end it by saying this. There's many, many things in life we overlook. One of the most important things I think is to really understand who you are and to really try to find some peace and some happiness in your life. No matter what, I know there's days when it seems impossible. I know there's days when we deal with these subjects that we feel as if we're alone. We're not. There's always somebody with you. And we can really understand things. And I get a lot of laughs out of a lot of these subjects I do. Not all of them. I really hate seeing things happen to good people that have been thrown in jail like Tony Alamo for 175 years. And I talk up about it. I'm going to do a couple more shows next week on it with a person from the ministry, his ministry, a Christian, who lost his children from these criminals in government who have stolen these kids using child and family services agencies. And we're going to do a couple shows on that. But they're talking about the New World Order, too. We have to really understand that you have to learn to live with it. And I always say this, never revolt. Make yourself known, pass out literature, do everything possible to help people understand it, but don't get caught in the New World Order's web. Because once you begin to oppose them, they will try to nail you some way, somehow, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next half hour. But what I also want to do is I might end up I got a little bit more on the flat Earth to cover, but we'll see how it goes, see how I feel after the break. A show like this to me sometimes is important. You kind of want your listeners to know a little bit about you. I'm sure you're not interested in a lot of the little things in my life, but if you listen to me, I guess you want to know a little bit about me, and the best way to do it is to tell you some things. And over the years, I've done that. And over the years, you've seen also, if you listen to my show, and progressions in my thinking patterns. And I can't say that 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't say a lot of things I'm saying today. But I've always kept an open mind, and I hope 10 years from now, I've really moved even farther towards the truth. And that's my wish for you. No matter how many years, we don't know. I could be gone tomorrow. But for whatever time we have left, make it worthwhile for you and the people that know you. And don't get involved in all of this garbage that the New World Order is doing. Understand them, teach people about them, but don't get caught in their trap, please. Do me that favor, because I'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States in 1963.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President today.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America?
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America?
I've got a vision for what I want to do for the country. See, I know exactly where I want to lead. It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean?
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this June 12th, 2015 day on our calendar. And it's a Friday. We got a half hour to go. Then we're going to go to the weekend, be back on Monday with more shows on this ongoing show, the Investigative Journal. I started almost 10 years ago. And through those 10 years, it's progressed, and we're at a point now where I'm asking that big question, how far have you been deceived? How far will you go? And it's interesting that I talk about this subject, the flat earth. I told you where it came from. And the story goes like this. I have a Christian friend who told me that she believed that the earth was stationary and the sun and the moon revolved around that. So I said, you're crazy. So I started looking at it, and after hours and hours of research, I told her, you may be right, and it's not as far-fetched as I thought, and I really shouldn't have been that close-minded. But I want to tell you, I think it might be flat, not round, not a sphere. And you know what? She thought I was crazy, but then after she researched it, she kind of believes the same thing. So funny how things work in that respect. But anyway, I did, I'm kind of all talked out this week, to be honest with you. I mean, I could go on with a half hour telling you stories. That's kind of in the mood I am. I'm kind of a good storyteller. I like doing that sometimes, and I had one plan for you this half hour. And what was it going to be about? Oh, it was, well, why not tell it to you? It's so much fun. And then we'll finish up with, a little bit of Eric Dubé and the flat earth, if maybe he's covering some things that you haven't heard. And anyway, I do recommend you look him up. It's Dubay. And he is continuing the Flat Earth Research Society that I talked about on yesterday's show, which is not the controlled opposition group called the Flat Earth Society. So check it out. But anyway, I was in Rome. I was a journalist. And it was about a year or two after the Pope was killed. And then John Paul was ushered in as their New World Order satanic leader. And I was doing some research on the Pope's death and how the Vatican covered up that. And at the same time, a book was really making the rounds called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And the writers were from England. And they also wrote, The Messianic Legacy. It was the first one, and that was a book that came out during that period of time. And the writers happened to be in Rome, and one of them I got to meet, and it was interesting, and I was quizzing him on this book because what happened was, and it turns out years later I find out he's the head of the Freemason magazine in England, so it was all put up, all staged. But anyway, the book centered on the fact that Jesus didn't die and was never on the cross, and he had a family, married Mary Magdalene, the whole story, and his bloodline still existed. And so the Vatican at that time, the stories came out in the newspaper, in the Corriere della Sera, the La Repubblica, things like that, and the Vatican at the time vehemently said, oh, these people are crazy, blah, blah, blah. You know, they play both sides of the coin here. And I remember I was sitting in a little coffee shop having a glass of wine with a priest. This was right over by the Vatican, right across from the Vatican. And there's a street there that they sell all these religious artifacts on. And I was talking to people, the shop owners, and they said, did you know what this used to be? And I said, no. And they used to call it the Strada della Puttana, which means the street of the whores. And before World War II, all the ladies of the night used to take care of the priests on that street. But after World War II, they basically, it was too obvious. So they moved it somewhere else. And then all the religious shop owners took over selling all the, you can go there and buy holy water and all that kind of, all their statues. Well, I'm talking to this high-level priest about this story because I wanted to do a story about it and find out who these people were. Where was this bloodline? And I said, well, what is it all about, Father? And he says, oh, these people, they try to blackmail us every year. Every so often they come up with this stuff, and then they'll blackmail us. And I said, what do you mean blackmail? And they said, well, they bring these stories out, and then we have to defend Christ and all of this stuff. And it's crazy. So he was kind of saying that the Vatican were the good guys, these guys were the bad guys, and blah, blah, blah. So I really looked into the story. And I found out that the guy who was proposing to be carrying the bloodline of Christ was named Pierre de something. I can't remember. God, my memory goes. Pierre, whatever. And he was a member of the Priory de Sion. And their headquarters was in Paris, France. And they had an address. And so I said, wouldn't it be cool to go and talk to this guy just to see what he's all about? He says he's carrying the bloodline of Jesus. And their group carries it. Now, since then, I've learned a lot about the Priory de Sion and all these secret societies and how they operate. But then I was a young journalist just tracking down a story, trying to figure out what life was all about. So I sold the story to one of the editors, and I said, let me go find this out. And so they paid my way to France. I took a train, and I went and tried to set up an appointment with this guy. Guess what? It was like running into a brick wall. Their organization, it was like a fake office. Some woman came to the door, cryptic woman, and she was like I was some kind of police detective or something, Oh, he's never around. He's never here. He's traveling all over the world. So, guess what? I never did get an interview with that supposed group. And they didn't even exist, really. It was some phony office they gave. So I said, something's up in Denmark here. So I ended up going back to Rome, telling them what I found out, and wrote a story that I couldn't find them, and tried to dig deeper. And I found out through some other sources who were more savvy than I was that they said, well, you're looking in the wrong place. The Jesuit order at Borgo Santo Spirito Cinque is the place you have to go, because they're the ones who probably control this organization and have placed certain articles in the libraries and things to spread these lies. And I said, well, why would a Catholic order want to do that? I mean, if they love Christ, why would they want to say he never was on the cross? And he said, well, you got a lot to learn. You don't know how they operate. They create the enemy, and then they create the opposition to that to get their result. And I said, what's their result? And he said, don't you know they're Satanists? I said, come on. Well, anyway, I tried to write that in a story, and the guy said, you can't use my name, so I took it to my editor, and he refused to run that, of course. And so I kept researching it, and I found out that was really it. They created this organization. The guy who wrote the book was the head of the Freemason magazine, I found out later, years later. And so my first experience in seeing how they really work was right there in Rome. So that's my story for the Friday. And let's go now back to the flat earth. And bear with me here. I'm going to put it on. It's a little bit of Eric Dubé. And hopefully you will enjoy the next 10 minutes to 15 minutes to really understand that you may not be walking on a sphere. This may not be a globe. You may be on a plane, and it's not an airplane, a flat plane that goes on forever and ever and ever. Okay, pretty soon I'll start singing, so I better do this. All right, let's go. Eric Dubé.
Appreciate it.
So happy to have you here, man. And I think a lot of people are going to be challenged with this one. And it is going to be tough to articulate some of these arguments without pictures and diagrams. But what I've seen has raised some serious red flags with a lot of things that we take as a given. Everything from the existence of nuclear weapons.
Oh, this is somebody questioning him. He's not too bad, so bear with me.
In the International Space Station to the makeup of the Earth and the entire universe itself. So let's not beat around the bush, man. You know, to challenge the heliocentric model of the solar system is pretty blasphemous in today's world. So how do we start to unravel some of this stuff? What are some of the biggest red flags with our traditional understanding that should start putting those first cracks in the listener's preconceived notions?
Sure. Well, just our common sense, everyday perception of the Earth, it is flat as far as we can tell. It is motionless as far as we can tell. And everything in the sky is revolving around us as far as we can tell. If nobody told us otherwise, we'd logically assume that the Earth was flat, motionless, with everything in the sky revolving around us. And you can prove that this is the case as well, for instance, with the horizon. As you rise up, no matter how high you go on the top of Mount Everest, or if you go in a balloon higher and higher, as far as 20 miles up and higher, we've gotten independent balloons have gone up with cameras. The horizon remains flat all the way around and rises to the eye of the camera all the way up. Now, if the Earth were a ball, no matter how big, the horizon is said to be the curvature of the ball. So as you rose up, the horizon would stay where it was, and you'd have to look down if you're in a hot air balloon, down further and further as you rose up, and the horizon would be below you. But in fact, as high as any non-NASA, RASA, or other Freemasonic space agency has ever shown us, as far as any independent camera has ever gone up with an independent rocket or balloon, as far as 20 miles up, totally flat and rises to the eye of the observer. So that's one proof. Of course, you can measure curvature if it actually existed. They say the ball Earth is 25,000 miles in circumference, and using spherical trigonometry, it figures out to 8 inches of curvature per mile squared. The mile is squared, so for 2 miles, it would be 2 times 2, 4 times 8 inches, 32 inches. And for the third mile, it's 3 squared, which is 3 times 3, 9 times 8 is 72. So you're going 8, 32, 72, 128 inches, and so on. And this is the kind of curvature that would exist on a ball. And specifically on a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, as I say it is. So you can check with theodolites and telescopes and different methods, lasers, to see if the Earth actually does have that curvature. And it's been tested over and over again and found to have no curvature whatsoever. So I mean, even if they had the number wrong and it was 100,000 miles in circumference, there would still be a calculable, measurable curvature that just isn't there. The only place curvature exists is in NASA photos and videos, and those can be proven to be CGI fakes, and the early ones were literally taken through a round window to make the Earth appear round. And that's it. It's just photo trickery and brainwashing that's got the world thinking that we're on a ball spinning around the sun with a magical force called gravity holding us on the underside of this spinning ball. It's all just brainwashing that we've received. It's pseudoscience accepted as legit science. But real science has confirmed geocentricity in the flat Earth for thousands of years. The flat Earth was known to ancient cultures all over the world for thousands of years, and it's actually a relatively recent phenomenon that people have been believing we're on a big ball spinning around the sun. Pythagoras first came up with it about 2,500 years ago. He's also often considered the first Freemason, and it didn't go anywhere much from there until 2,000 years later. Copernicus picked up where he left off, another Jesuit Freemason, and he really picked things up, and Kepler and Galileo and Newton, and now Einstein and NASA, Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and all these people, they're all part of this Freemasonic club that is building a pseudo-scientific worldview to indoctrinate the slave class so that we can be propagandized into doing anything. This is basically the biggest thing you could possibly lie about. So the psychopaths who control society are interested in world domination. The best way to brainwash the whole world is to lie to the whole world about what the world is. What is the earth under your feet? What is in the sky above your head? Where did we come from? You know, it's now, this lie has now evolved into a Big Bang evolution, heliocentric spinning ball cosmology, when in reality, we're not a cosmic accidental sneeze, nothingness turned everything. This is quite obviously intelligently designed, this thing we're experiencing here, this life, this universe. I can't believe anyone in their right mind can look me in the eyes with a straight face and say, no man, it's all random. This is all just random. But people do.
Yeah, right. I think you make a lot of great points, man, and I think the curvature argument is pretty damn strong. And I pulled this off your website in the comments section because, to your credit, you spend a lot of time writing thorough answers to questions and responses to critics, and that's where a lot of my questions got answered. And so here's a little more detail about the curvature argument from your site. It seems like lighthouses are one great example. The first one you have is the Isle of Wight Lighthouse in England. It's 180 feet high and can be seen up to 42 miles away, a distance at which modern astronomers say the light should fall 996 feet below the line of sight. Why can you still see it? And then you have several other good examples in the lighthouse department, but another one worth mentioning that people be familiar with is the Statue of Liberty. It stands 326 feet above sea level, and on a clear day can be seen as far as 60 miles away. Now, if the Earth was a globe at the dimensions that they give us, that would put Lady Liberty at an impossible 2,074 feet below the horizon. These examples seem hard to rectify unless there's some obvious answer that I'm missing, but I would say this is a pretty compelling thread of evidence, my man.
Yeah, the distance at which the light from lighthouses can be seen at sea is just way too far for the Earth to be a ball 25,000 miles in circumference. Another great example is the Notre Dame Antwerp spire, standing 403 feet high from the foot of the tower, with Strasbourg measuring 468 feet above sea level. And so with the aid of a telescope, ships can be seen on the horizon, and captains declare they can see the spire from an amazing 150 miles away. If the Earth were a globe, however, at that distance, the spire should be an entire mile, 5,280 feet below the horizon. So there's a lot of examples like this where you've got a whole mile, say, that the light should be below the horizon. You should not be able to see it. And even light refraction that the naysayers try to bring up can't account for it, as it can only account for 1/12 of whatever the original distance is. So, the light at which lighthouses can be seen at sea, as well as the fact that canals, tunnels, and railroads are never built with curvature in mind whatsoever. That's not necessary. And if there were, then they're plans would be off, in fact. I've got quotes in my book from railroad engineers and canal builders saying how it's hard enough for railroads to make curves horizontally, let alone if we were on a ball and railroads would have to be curving up on the ball. And they give examples of different railroads over the earth and how long they are and how much curvature they'd have to be ascending and how it would be so impossible for the trains to be able to go up this curve, because trains are made to be on a level. They just can't operate that way. So there's a lot of proofs like that.
You mentioned Neil deGrasse Tyson, and one compelling thing you have in your documentary is Neil deGrasse Tyson is on TV and he's talking about the shape of the Earth, and he's talking about how they just discovered now that the Earth is more pear-shaped than it is round. And I'm thinking, well, we've been seeing pictures of the Earth from space, and it's a perfect circle. So either you don't know what you're talking about, or those pictures aren't real. This is a serious disconnect that's hard to rectify, Neil.
Absolutely, yeah. And they've said that it's a sphere, and then they've said that it's an oblate spheroid flattened at the poles, so it's kind of like smushed. And now, more recently, they're saying it's an oblate spheroid flattened at the poles with a bulge in the south. So it's kind of pear-shaped. So they keep changing it, but you're right, the pictures that they've given us, they show a perfect circle. They don't show any sort of bulge or oblateness as they claim exists. And people say, oh, well, it's just not enough to be seen. But they're claiming it's quite a bit. He said it's the amount of Everest above sea level is how much more oblate it is, supposedly.
Right, you would think that would show up in the pictures. Now, a lot of people's first question is going to be, well, where's the edge? And I was surprised to see how easy that is to rectify, but I'm sure you get that a lot. How do you tell people when they come at you with, well, where's the edge? Why aren't people sailing off the edge or whatever?
So, in the flat Earth model, the North Pole is in the middle, and the Earth is a disk shape, and the Antarctica is all the way around, holding the oceans in. And so it's a fact, if you're at the North Pole and you go south, no matter which actually, it doesn't matter where you are. If you go south, eventually you're going to end up in Antarctica. But on the ball model, it's just a little ice continent underneath the ball. In this model, it's all the way around you, holding the oceans in. As for whether there's an edge beyond the Antarctic ice plateau, this wall that holds everything in is about 100 to 200 feet tall, and once you climb up on the ice wall, it's a plateau of snow that just goes on and on and on. And the public and myself are ignorant at the moment as to whether there is an edge at some point, whether there'd be a barrier, a dome, as many ancient cultures have said there is, or whether it's an infinite flat plain and it's just snow, ice, wind, and darkness forever. So that's still a mystery, how the ice actually terminates. But it is a fact that if you travel south from anywhere on Earth, you will end up at the Antarctic ice wall. The lie is that there's a South Pole, and they've put a ceremonial red and white barbershop pole with a ball Earth on top of it at an arbitrary point along the Antarctic ice. And they even admit that it's not the actual South Pole, and they have this complex model how the North and South Poles on the ball Earth are constantly moving because of the nature of the molten magnetic core of the ball Earth they claim exists. But the real reason is they have guided tours there to the South Pole, and if you took a compass and you stood at their ceremonial pole, you should be able to walk in a circle and north would be in every direction. But of course that wouldn't happen, and so they'd have to answer to all these tourists every year as to why the South Pole clearly isn't the South Pole. They even admit it, you can see on YouTube, and they give their complex answer as to why it's always moving and you can never really find it. Same with the North Pole. In fact, if you watch North Pole documentaries, they always claim they're at the North Pole, but they're only showing a Garmin with 90 degrees north latitude. They never pull out a compass to actually check if they're at the North Pole. They're just on some ice somewhere, it could be anywhere on Earth, and then they're like 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 feet, we're at the North Pole. It's just some random ice, nothingness. So yeah, it's easy to lie about these things. And these no man's lands, the North Pole and the Antarctica, they don't allow us to independently explore them. So people like Rodney Clough or Jarl Anderhoy, independent explorers who've wanted to go to the North Pole and Antarctica without getting government pre-approval and only going with their escorts to the places they want you to go. They've actually been turned around at gunpoint by military vessels, not allowing them to go in. Jarl Anderhoy's faced jail time and fines for it as well. So they definitely don't want us exploring what is in the middle of the flat Earth and on the edges. They keep us in the middle.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. And the first thing I had thought when I was getting into this is like, well, what about airplanes? You know, people fly from North America to China to Europe, all around the globe, or, you know, the proposed globe. And this is easy to rectify with the model you laid out with the North Pole in the center. When you fly, if you think about the rings on a bullseye, you can fly around it can make it seem like you're going around a ball, but you're really just going around in a circular pattern on a flat plane. And I was like, wow, I never really thought about it like that. And if you look at, well, of course, you know, something we always talk about is hidden in plain sight, symbolisms and corporate logos that they use. And if you look at the UN flag, this is exactly the model